Hi everyone, Acesup here for PokerNev. Thanks for joining me again for part 2 now of this PokerStars $530 Bounty Builder review. If you haven't seen part 1, I'll put a link for that in the description below. We're battling high stakes player Raider-Lot, and with a considerable difference between second and first place payouts, especially with the large bounties in play, the pressure was on. So let's continue on now, going through the play of each of the hands and discussing any interesting spots.
Raise and he folds. Queen 3 off. Call and fold to the c-bet on that board. Not a good flop. King Jack. Raise, but he folds, unfortunately, with the King Jack suited there. Get a walk. That's good when you have 9-4 off. Pocket 4s, raise, and he calls. I decided to check back here. I think that's fine. Sometimes we have the best hand. We could make some strong hands on the turn. And we really don't want to see a flop check raise, that's for sure. And we can call a lot on the turn here. We only need 26% equity. Given that he'll still probably have some 9x, 8x, maybe 4x or 3x and some flush draws and bluffs like that, I think we have a pretty easy call here. Could have the best hand and can still make some straights or trips. But we end up making 2 pair. So I just check it back. And he had 9s, which is interesting. Really wouldn't have thought that he would have had a pair that strong since he didn't 3-bet pre. So maybe some of those bigger jams that he made were very nutty hands and he was just hoping to cooler us. Because it seems like 9s would be a pretty easy 3-bet pre-flop in a heads-up match. So, he could just be mixing it up though and just throwing in a few calls here and there. That's fine. Who knows? Easy defend with a 10-jack suited. Given how he's playing, I think we could 3-bet a little bit more merged. But 10-jack suited, that's fine as a call as well. Folding turn. Raise and he folds. 5-9 suited. A little bit weak. No backdoor flush draw. Just a gut shot. I folded. Queen 2 limp and fold to a 2-bet. Defend here with a 7-10 off. Bad flop. Pretty good for his range. We only have the 10 high. Just folding. Raise and he calls. C-betting this flop, which I think is fine. And we pick up a really nice turn here. Have the top pair, so definitely want to fire again and try and get value from some worse pairs. And there's a ton of draws out there. And we would be semi-bluffing with some of those draws ourselves quite a lot. So we need to find, a fair bit of value here that we want to be betting all the over pairs. Of course, the 9x and some straights that we can have and trips and 2 pairs. Maybe even some 7x as well. He just folds on the turn. Let's take that one down. Queen 6 defend. Definitely going to call flop with a pair here in the over. Turn goes check, check, and then the ace on the river. We check any bets. Kind of small bet here. So I think he could go for value with 2 pair. I don't think he's going to have many straights. We do have a pretty significant flush blocker as well. And that prompts me to go for the river check raise here. I really like this play, given our hand combination. And it's consistent with the way I would play some flushes and 7x. I would check the river and give him a chance to try and value bet thinly with a hand like ace-8 or maybe even just ace-king or something like that. I'm not sure the way he plays if he would go that thin. As I said, he generally doesn't. So I think he's mostly going to have 2 pair here. He could have turn 2 pair or even flop 2 pair and decided on the 1-card straight board to check the turn and now thinks he can get value. So there's still enough hands he can have, I think, that we can put pressure on and get him to fold. And this hand is just a little bit too weak to call with. It's pretty much the bottom of our range. And like I said, we do have pretty good blockers. Specifically the Queen of Clubs, of course, is a nice card to have, since it does block a decent chunk of his value. And I mean, we can easily have, like I said, you know, some 7x, or particularly at 8 or 9 with two clubs. So for example, Jack 9 of clubs, Queen 8 of clubs, and stuff like that. So worked out well. Ace Jack, go ahead and call the 3-bet in position here. Don't really want to 4-bet it. I think it's going to play nicely in position, and if we 4-bet and get shoved on, then we'd have to fold, and he hasn't been too crazy, so just call and then continue on the flop, since we have 2 overs with a backdoor straight and backdoor flush. Get a terrific turn card. So once he bets again, it's a really easy call. And then he checks the river. We know that he doesn't go too thin for value, but I think checking Ace King and Ace Queen would be really nitty. So I think we have a green light to bet here, and so I do. Really hoping to get called by some worse Ace X that 3-bet pre-flop. At frequency, he might do that. Or just hero with some other weird stuff. But he folds. 3-9, fold. Deuce 5, fold. Get a walk. Folding the 6-3. Queen 10, easy defend. I think just checking this hand down is fine. Can find some other bluffs, especially on a somewhat connected 2-tone board on the turn. We've got to be careful with our bluffing frequency. Queen 7, raise and he calls. Easy C-bet with top pair. Easy double barrel. We get to the river, and I think it's close now, because some of his hands that continued on the flop will have got there on the river by making a flush. Particularly since the 9 is not a spade. He can have 9-10, Jack 9 of spades and all that sort of stuff. Maybe he's got some stuff like King 10 of spades that had a gut shot and then continued, given they picked up the flush outs on the turn as well. So if it wasn't a spade, I would definitely bet again and try and get called by 9x, or occasionally, a few of the, not many, but a few of the worst queens you can have. But here I think that it's just getting too thin, given how weak our kicker is and the fact that the flush got there. It does feel very 9x-ish though, and it was. So it's just a pity that the flush came in. Otherwise, I think I would have gone for a nice value bet on the river and he would call. Fold the flop there. Raise with the King 9 and he folds. 4-10 off, fold. I open with Jack 9 off and he 3-bets 3x. It's a little bit of a small 3-bet. So given that we only need 33% equity in position, going to go ahead and call here. It's definitely a little bit of a concern though, in the way he plays, that he actually might be 3-betting a little bit smaller because he either A, has really strong hands and he just doesn't want us to fold, or B, he has some slightly merged hands in his 3-betting range that want us to call with weaker hands he dominates. So for example, if he has, say, King Jack or King Queen suited, maybe he just 3-bets hoping that we continue with this sort of hand. I do think that he might have that line of thought. But I don't want to get too carried away trying to make sick reads. I'm just going to think, well, we've got a decent hand in position and we don't need very good pot odds to continue given the small 3-bet size. So I'm going to continue more in a sort of theoretical way rather than potentially making some read-based mistakes without having a lot of information. You got to be careful you don't get too assumptive. But at the same time, you do need to be aware of these things and thinking about them, but not getting too carried away. So I think we could just call, but it was close with Jack 9 off for sure. Definitely a bit of a marginal hand to be calling 3-bets with, but given the price and the being in position, I think it was okay. Raise and he folds. Ace-6 offsuit here, and I go for a 3-bet. I like it. Remember what I was saying earlier about game flow, and we haven't really 3-bet for a little while, so I think a player like Raiderlot will give us a little bit more credit, and he does actually fold, so that's terrific. You got to remember too, when he's calling 3-bets really wide, like I said, we could get a little bit more merged for value, but also we're going to have some pretty profitable c-betting situations given the width of his range, so we don't need to be too careful. But definitely A6 offsuit there, I think is okay at a frequency. Go ahead and c-bet on the 3-6 queen board. This is really just trying to get protection and value from some of those straight draws or floats that he might have. This is quite an interesting spot against this opponent. Because he floats so wide, you could go just straight up here for a equity denial and bet. I think that would be fine. Or you could opt to just check and bluff catch on most rivers, which is what I decided to do. But he hit the 8, so it's a little bit unfortunate. But you can see that he did check call with just the jack high on the flop. And it must be close. But I think in this situation, probably a fold. I mean, obviously he has 2 middling cards, backdoor flush, backdoor straight. So yeah, I guess it is close. A GTO solver might continue at a frequency, but you got to remember he's raid a lot. He's not a GTO solver. He's not going to play perfectly across turns and rivers. So I think the jack high out of position is a little bit ambitious, but not too bad. But he's just doing it all the time, these types of floats. So that's what I meant when I said on the turn, maybe we could just bet for sheer equity denial just to keep it simple. Or we can, as I said, go for the bluff catch, which I think is pretty profitable as well. Especially on that sort of board where there will be some wide floats you can have and some missed straight draws and so forth. So it's just unfortunate that he binked the river. But when he bets, I think it's pretty much a queen or an 8. And not much else, because like I said, he doesn't bet too thinly. So I think we had an easy call. $5-10, limp. I just checked the flop just to mix it up a bit. I would normally bet. I would have preferred to have seen a bet, to be honest. Once he leads turn after we've checked flop, I think we have to call. But I think we can just fold the river for sure. If you go into combo land, it's easy to get carried away and say, yeah, but you can have, you know, just a queen of clubs, king of clubs, some 9x, jack x, maybe some 6x, blah, blah. But I just think it's consistent with the way he plays that on these wetter boards, he doesn't get carried away bluffing, as I said before. So I think he just has it a lot and we can just fold. But it's easy to say on the river, you know, we've checked the flop, we look weak. We have 2 pair with the aces. Does he really have an ace? He's only just checked back pre. So it's easy to get carried away with that way of thinking. But I think the best way to approach this spot is just to say that he's by far under bluffing the river. So even though we only need 29% equity, we can just fold. 5-9 suited, defend. Folded the jack-jack 3 flop. 6-8 suited, open. C-bet. Check turn, check river. It's probably okay. It did look like he had 10x, but yeah, I mean, we can find a lot of other hands, especially all the queen x and jack x that we might want to bluff the turn with, or some other stuff like 4-5. If we're barreling with 6-8 on this board, we're going to be going pretty crazy with our bluffing frequency. So I just decided to check turn and river. Fold the 7 deuce. Limp and stab. we probably have just enough showdown here to check with Jack High. And we're not really going to fold any pair that he can have. And I guess even King High might sometimes hero. It looked like he had an 8. He probably would have bluffed with 9-10, so stuff like that. Kind of looked like he had an 8. It'd be a tough bluff against Rate a Lot, I think, to barrel there. After we've limped pre-flop, our range isn't going to include that many aces or... I mean, obviously we can have Queen X, but just small balled it. I think given, again, what I was saying about his c-betting strategy, that it's a bit polar, that we can probably lead the turn here. And I've just gone small. And the idea is just to put pressure on his ace high and his smaller pairs, which I think he can have. It would be consistent with the way he's been playing when he does check the flop. And 8x as well, you know, if he's got 7-8 and stuff like that. So I think this is okay. But he does call. I think it's close on the river if we want to bet with this hand or not. We can see that he did just have that sort of hand, just the ace high. So it was a little bit ambitious by him on the turn. I guess there were some draws out there. But, you know, we can still have a lot of hands that just have him in really bad shape. And even some of our draws, like the one we had, or, you know, flush draws are just doing well. So it's a little bit of a loose turn call. Worked out for us. Raise any calls. Go ahead and c-bet. And we hit a 9 on the turn, which is good. I prefer to check here. Given how wide he floats flops, I think it's the way to go is just to bluff catch. Because it's getting a little bit hard to get value from 2x and 6x on this board. He could still have some 10x, occasionally have a better 9, and some 7-8 for a straight. So I think just checking, maybe he'll bluff with, you know, King 7 of clubs on the river, or, you know, something weird, Jack Queen. So we have a pretty easy river call with the pair here, given the way the hand was played. But he did hit the 9. He had the ace 9, so that's a bit unfortunate. Defend this time with the ace 4 off. Just fold on that board. Pretty nasty board. King 8 offsuit here. Raise it up. Rate a Lot defends. Flop the top pair, so go ahead and c-bet. And he check raises. I think you can still have enough bluffs here where we just have an easy continue with top pair. The most obvious being the gut shots and the flush draws. So a call. He fires again on the turn. So he's really trying to say he's got hands like King 3, King 9, set of 3s. He doesn't go too thin for value, as I mentioned. And he did just call with 9s against a raise earlier. So I guess he could have pocket 9s, even though he should really be 3-betting that pre-flop most of the time. But it's not that many combinations for value. And, you know, like I said, with all those draws, I think we have a pretty easy call on the turn, especially when now there's a double flush draw board. Maybe some of his semi-bluffs on the flop picked up a flush draw on the turn, like 8-10 of hearts and so forth. That could go into a flop check raising range. And then the river he checks. So I think we have a very easy check here. We'll definitely be way too thin for value given the aggression that he's shown. And we're really just hoping he had the flush draw or hand like 10-jack that's given up. And he did. So that's a good one. A kind of a tough bluff for him, I guess, on the river. Once it repeats and the backdoor flush gets there with his hand. So I can understand why he gave up. I went for the donk bet here, and I don't mind it. It's a low frequency play that I'll use on a flop texture like this one. It can be pretty effective against a lot of opponents. It's probably so-so against Rate a Lot. If we think he's not raising the flop much and denying us our equity, then it's a pretty good play and has some merit to it. Especially, like I said, on this flop texture. So if you look at a sort of GTO context, you can see that the solver will use it at a low frequency. But that anticipates your opponent raising quite aggressively. And I don't think Rate a Lot does. So he might approach this sort of spot more like this, where you can see I've node locked it so that if we lead the size I chose, he only raises with 9-10 on the 5-6-9 flop. So top pair with an overcard, kicker, or better. And if that's the case, yeah, it does look a bit tight. It's only raising 10% now. But I think actually it's a reasonable estimation of how I'd expect him to play. He might continue with some of this as well. I probably should have left that in, but it's not going to make much difference. But you can see that by now not denying us our equity, it actually makes the lead on this flops texture quite an attractive option, and the solver now does it a lot. And so we can just lead, and then if he does call on a card like the turn we're going to get, the 5 of clubs, we can probably just give up unless we pick up a flush draw. But yeah, I think it's not too bad. Like I said, just do it at a low frequency and just trying to mix things up. See how he operates. Did give up on the turn. I mean, I don't mind barreling at some frequency here, to be honest. The 5 isn't too bad for us. We still have some straights and 2 pairs and, you know, that sort of thing that I led for value. We can fold out some high card combinations, which we do expect him to have a lot since he's quite sticky. And he had King 10, which, you know, is fine to call the flop with anyway. But it actually would raise in a solver at a frequency. But, you know, as I said, I don't expect him to be raising that much. I think he plays a little bit more passively in these spots, sort of fearing the nuts more than perhaps he should, which is why I think on wetter boards, he shows a little bit more caution. So, yeah. I mean, when you think about the other options, I mean, we could check raise the flop as well. Don't hate that. Check calling is a bit dirty. But it's close with a gut shot backdoor flush. So I just threw in the donk, and I think it's not too bad, but do so sparingly. 5-10 here, limp, and I mean, I think just betting the turn is probably fine, just to avoid him getting there. Pretty unlikely he's going to do anything funky on that turn, I think. So we just sort of deny equity. Fold that one. Ace-7 suited, raise. I think with the 2 overs and the gut shot, it's okay to c-bet, and I do. Especially as I said, on these wetter boards, he doesn't seem to check raise that much. I think we can just check back given how wide he floats flops here and just bluff catch again. Similar to the other situation when we had, was it Ace-7 as well? Or Ace-8, something like that? Oh no, he had Jack-8 and he rivered the 8. And I think we had Ace-7 or something like that, Ace-9. So it's a very similar situation where we've got an opponent who floats really wide on a draw-heavy board that's run out pretty good. We can just flick in a call and bluff catch. And he just had the Jack-8. So again, the story checks out, you know, just floating out of position with a really wide range. And again, you know, this hand maybe at some frequency is okay with the backdoor straight, backdoor flush, 2 overs, but it's just doing it all the time, and you can see it does get him in trouble. Folded there. Fold the 5-9. Jack-5 suited, go ahead and defend. Did fold that flop. 2-5 limp, and I did call the 2-bet here, 4x. It's close, I guess. Probably a little bit too loose. I raised the flop. I don't mind this too much, just because we will have a lot of hands here that we can raise for value. I mean, limp calling generally includes a lot of suited hands as we have, and we can have all the straights and 2 pairs as well. So we actually have a fair bit of value. So when we're constructing a bluffing range, I think it's not too bad to throw in a few hands like this that at least have a little bit of equity. Here, a gut shot. A 6 will give us a straight. And just try and fold out high card combos. And, you know, we're getting a decent price on the bluff once we see there's, you know, 468K in there after he bets quite small. I mean, it doesn't have to work that often, does it? So I don't mind this play at a low frequency. I think it's okay. Decided though on the turn, the king just to check back, and unfortunately we don't hit a straight, and our opponent bets around 40% on the river, so I just folded. I think it's not too bad. Defending with the 8-9. I check raise this flop, and I just think this hand is slightly too weak. I think if I had Jack 8 or even 10-8, it's getting closer to a hand that should check raise. I know he is sticky, but he does play a little bit more conservatively against check raises rather than just C bets. It is a dry board though, so I could imagine him just floating with some stuff. He will have a little bit of 8x that's worse and smaller pairs and some ace highs and so forth, but I think from a metagame perspective, I was just kind of hoping that this check raise might freak him out a bit, and he'd be like, no, you don't have a deuce. You're just trying to rep a deuce. I'm going to call you. Rather than thinking more about sort of range versus range interaction. It's more of the old school metagame stuff. Just hoping he gets a bit out of line. And I mean, overall, we've been pretty aggressive. We did just check raise with the 5 high a moment ago, so I thought check raising again might get him to over adjust, was what I hoped. But it didn't work out. He had the 9s. So like I said, I think this is just a bit thin. Maybe around 8-10 on Jack 8. You know, getting, like we saw earlier in the match on the 9 high flop when I had Queen 9. That was a little bit clearer because the board was a little bit wetter. So there was more worse hands that could call. So there was more value to be got. Here, it's just such a dry board. It's very hard for him to continue with that many worse hands. Having said that, it's also hard for him to defend against a check raise on this dry board with the correct range. But I think if anyone can do it, he can, because he defends a lot, pretty sticky. So maybe he would. A lot of players, I think, wouldn't, but he's not one of them. So I think that was a small mistake. And did cost us a little bit. But now we pick up the ace-queen, raise and c-bet, and take it down. It's a real battle. Ace-queen again. 3-bet and he folds. 5-9 limp and stab. He calls. Turn the straight draw. So I think firing here now is really good, and I go over pot, which I like, because it puts that 3x and 4x under massive pressure. We do have the straight draw as a bit of backup, and we know that he does float against c-bets, or as was the case here, a stab very wide. So we can really pressure him. And I think by now I'd sort of caught on after that last hand we saw where we got to bluff catch with the ace high that he is just sticking. And that definitely, I think, helped make the turn decision easier there. Huge flop here. Go ahead and bet small on the turn. Just really hoping to get the ace, queen, king and queen highs to call. Obviously hoping for that miracle when he has the other 9. And we have now the super full house and can win a huge pot, but he just folds. So that was that. But we're back up to a similar stack, both around 4 million. So just trying to play solid here and exploit those weaknesses that I mentioned. And, you know, just be patient. Still very deep. Limp with a 3-5. He hasn't been 2-betting much, so that's good. We're getting away with the limps, which is nice. Try and realize some equity with some of these more marginal hands. Having said that, I think stabbing the flop is good and checking the turn is close. I think just protecting equity on the turn is fine as well, since he will have a number of flush and straight draws. And if he does have a 5x, it's going to be a chop a lot anyway. And we know he floats pretty wide. But I think this river is just so bad, even though I said he floats wide. I mean, just a lot of stuff gets there. And he has sized up. And remember, he does tend to do that with value. So I think here mostly he has a hand like 9-10 or a jack, maybe a king. And it's an easy fold. But I called. regrettably. He did have the jack. Queen 3, and we have an easy call on the flop. Turn is interesting. He fires again. We only need 23% equity, and I think he's the sort of player that if he did bet that more sort of polarized range on the flop, that he would probably fire to represent the ace on the turn. So I think we have to continue. It would be really hard here though on the river if he fired. Thankfully he checked. And he did have that sort of more polarized c-betting hand here. He had a very weak hand, just 5 high on the flop. But he did pick up a gut shot on the turn, so I don't mind his turn bet. But I think he should have fired on the river as well and just tripled it off with his hand. Especially since he had the gut shot and he had a spade as well. And he's at the bottom of his range. But he did let us hang on and win at showdown, so that's a good one. Five, 7 suited. I go ahead and 3-bet here. I like it. He calls. We flop top pair with a gut shot. So bet half pot and take it down. 3-9 offsuit fold. King 8 suited. Easy call. Flop goes check, check. I think I'm just going to try and show this hand down, but he does fire on the turn. I think it's really close here, and I couldn't fault someone for calling. I think that would be fine. I decided just to fold, given what I said about his tendency to check a little bit more merged. You know, those medium strength hands that I think have a little bit more showdown. And so in a marginal spot like that, I think it tips the scale in favor of folding. Just keeping it simple. Ace 4 raise, he defends. I decided to check the flop here and go for the delayed c-bet, which I think is good. And he calls, and we get the 5 of clubs on the river, which is a pretty bad card. He still could have a little bit of 8x. He could have some flush draws, I guess. Maybe the odd straight or 2 pair that got there. I think this would be getting a little bit too thin, given this run out. Yeah, he could have some worse 4x or maybe a 3, but you know, he could also have some 5x at 5-6, 5-7 or something. So the action to this point has only been 1 bet. So his range is somewhat wide, and I think just checking is the way to go. And we know that he doesn't value bet too thinly, so he could check the turn with some 8x, and he did. So that's unfortunate. Get a walk with Queen 5. 3-5. Raise any calls. I think it was a raise. Yeah, raised it up. I'd limp sometimes as well. Pretty good flop for us with the middle pair, so we'll go ahead and c-bet. Get some protection, value from some draws or his wide floats, but he folded. Queen 9, defend. I think our hand just has enough equity in this situation. We only need 23%, and we sometimes have the best hand, and we have some backdoor draws, middling cards. Pretty good turn. Got the flush draw now as well. But I don't think we need to bluff this hand. I just think it has enough showdown. I prefer to bluff with some 4-6, 6-7, 7-9, a few weaker hands that we can have. I think this hand is just strong enough to take the showdown and win. Open with the Queen 5 suited. Raid a lot calls, and I think on this board could go either way. Decided to check back. He checks again turn. I check. By the river, I think when we see a third check by our opponent, this hand is a combination of fairly low down in our range and does have some blocker value. So it's very hard for him to call if we bet a healthy size with 1 pair, which is sort of the top of his range. He looks pretty capped when he triple checks. Does he ever have a trap in there? Well, it's not impossible, but I think mostly he's just capped, and we can go ahead and bet here and rep some hands that kind of might have slow played or just got there, you know, some 2 pairs. And obviously we're going to have hands like King, Queen and that sort of thing. So with the Queen blocker value and us having such a weak hand, fairly low down in our range. I mean, yeah, we do have some weaker stuff, but it's relatively weak. So fire and take that one down. I like that bet. I think it's good. Jack 2 suited, defend, fold flop. Queen 10. Raise and take it down. 8-4 offsuit, fold. Ace 9 off. Raise and take it down. King 8 off, defend. Flop goes check, check. So given what I said about his c-betting strategy, I think we have a very clear turn bet here because he will have some smaller pairs and ace highs and stuff like that, which are going to probably call on this drawy board on the turn. However, he doesn't call. He raises. So it's a little bit perplexing. It's a very small raise. It's odd because he's giving us such a good price to continue. We only need 21% equity and we have top pair. So I'm not really sure what this is trying to accomplish. I mean, he's trying to say he's got a monster, but maybe he's just trying to get a cheap price on a bluff or to showdown with a more marginal hand or draw. But we just have an easy call given the strength of our hand and the price we're getting. And thankfully, the river goes check, check, because I wouldn't have wanted to see a big bet, that's for sure. Not with that line he took. But he did just have the Jack 3 suited, which is definitely a misplay. I think he can just call turn. That would be fine. He's occasionally got the best hand and he's got a good draw. So that would be the more standard line. If he does raise it like he did and go and try and rep, a monster, I think he just needs to bet huge on the river with his hand, especially since he now blocks the straight and he just has a weak hand. I think he can just go ahead and, pot or even over pot the river and put the pressure on if he's going to raise turn. Not that I would play it that way, but if he had a better plan, I think it wouldn't have been too bad, but it does seem a little bit of a misstep to raise the turn really small and then just check river. The Cowboys. Now, come on. Finish him. Nope, he just calls. And he doesn't even call a c-bet, unfortunately. 5-10 off. I did fold to the raise there. That's a close one. King 9, raise and go ahead and c-bet. Pretty easy value bet on the flop. And on the turn, I think it's okay to bet again. And I did. Yeah, he will have a little bit of ace-x, but we know that he does float pretty wide. So he could still have maybe hit the 8, have some 9x, have some 4x, have some flush draws, have some stuff like Queen 10, 10 Jack, which might call this bet size again. And he does. Some of those hands I just mentioned got there and are better than just a 9 now. So I think we have to just show down and hope that we did have the best hand. And, well, we did until the river. I'm not sure about that one. He just called with the 10 high on the ace-9-4 flop. So, again, story checks out. Just floating, hanging in there, and just getting runner, 2 pair. So, I like the way we played it. It was just unfortunate that he got there. 6-7 defend. And once we see the flop check and we get the jack on the turn, I'd really like to see a lead here. A chunky size, and I do just that. Given what I said about his c-betting strategy, I think a lot of the times he's going to have just some high card value or some weak pairs that are just trying to show down. And so now with the additional overcard on the turn, we can put some pressure on, and we have the up and down draw, which is good backup. So that was a nice semi-bluff.
That's the end of this part now. Thanks for watching. Please hit the like button if you enjoyed this part, and if you haven't done so yet and want to become a part of the community, please subscribe and hit the bell notification so you'll be the first to know when the following parts of this and upcoming reviews are released. We also have a Facebook group. There's been lots of free giveaways recently. I'll leave a link for that in the description so you can check it out. That's it for now. Thanks again for stopping by. This was Aces Up for PokerNerve. See you next time.